Okay, I'm going to read my deep water review, and I'm not going to try to explain myself. I'm just going to read it, and that's all. Here we go. When I began watching the movie, I had to replay the first 6 minutes several times before I actually felt connected enough to keep going. I thought I was missing detail because something was distracting me, and I figured that was a direct parallel of the relationship between our two main characters, which are Melinda, who is played by Ana de Armas, and Vic, who is played by Ben Affleck. Once I finally got a chance to settle into the experience of the film, the number one thing that caught my attention was the first line said, and it was one simple question: what? The second thing I noticed was that Vic says only 2 words to his wife in the first 5 minutes of the film, and he says the exact same thing twice. What? Something about it made me uncomfortable. Maybe that was the reason I kept rewinding and rewinding. My overall impression of the film from beginning to end was that I think calling it a psychological thriller is a bit of an over-exaggeration. There was something about the killing that I feel made the nature of the screenplay kind of vague. I didn't necessarily feel like my mind was being played with when it comes to this movie. Maybe because everything felt so realistic. It was almost as if I could see and visualize this story taking place in reality. Even our characters were oddly portrayed in a way that left no holes in my imagination. Holes that I feel are necessary for a psychological thriller to be genuinely impactful when it comes to its story. I think the problem I had was that everything about the dialogue and the course of events were revealing. And before the first death in the film happened, I began to lose interest. But I think I enjoyed that it was a very standard and well thought out concept. I enjoyed that it was easy to follow from beginning to end, but our characters had no secrets. I think that's really what made it boring at some point. And I think it was also why it started to feel sequenced. And I guess that's another thing I must admit that I admire was the writing and the character development. The character development felt sequenced, and their behavior had patterns that could be recognized. And as the observer, I found it somewhat pleasing that there was a frequency I could sync to. It may have been the use of music to add to the theatrics and increase in tension. So, going back to Vic and his first 2 lines being one word, what? The first time he asks this question to his wife, Melinda, she answers with nothing. The second time Vic asks this question to Melinda, she replies with, I need your help. I think after this conversation, the rest of the film takes us down this rabbit hole to explore the true nature of Vic asking his wife what, and her replying with something as passive as nothing. Melinda ultimately feels as though her husband doesn't really love her because he doesn't exert any energy towards playing a more dominant and assertive role when it comes to her sexual and social connections with other men. She feels as though he shows no passion and sometimes treats her like she is an embarrassment, like she can't handle herself, or as though she is immature. I want to say the relationship is polyamorous, but I don't think it was something that both partners consented to. Melinda says that it was Vic's idea to start a family and have children, and because Vic doesn't give her the kind of masculine dominance that she needs, she tends to step out of the relationship and date other men on the side, then bring them home to meet her husband. She typically introduces the men she dates as her friend, but we hear Vic admit that he killed one of Melissa's friends in the past because he was too close to her. He then later passes it off as a joke. Melinda, I think, knows exactly what she wants in a man, but I personally feel as though she just might not be as true to herself as she seems on the outside. I think she makes a lot of decisions in the film that tend to mask her identity and her true feelings. I think she honestly feels extremely insecure and miserable in her relationship. There is also a part of her that just hasn't fully accepted the reality of the kind of man she chose to marry, despite her knowing the relationship may not be something that she is fully in agreement with. It all feels a bit premature, but I do still think she knows what kind of man she wants. I don't know if it's the kind of man she needs, but when it comes to the kind of man she wants, she can do things that should make him want to set some boundaries and mark his territory when it comes to her being his woman. I think it makes her feel unappreciated and misunderstood when he takes her behavior as a way of her saying that she is uninterested or that she doesn't care about his love. I think the moment reality gets all distorted and disproportionate is when instead of Vic showing to his wife that her actions and behavior make him want to kill every man that she shows affection, he actually kills every man that she shows affection. Instead of just telling his wife that he doesn't like that she is dating men outside of their marriage, he rather pretend to be nonchalant and okay with it. And honestly, it's this weird perception of what a healthy husband is and what non-toxic masculine energy looks like. I think to Vic, if he lets his wife do whatever she wants and gives her the freedom to make her own choices and decisions without invading her privacy and asking about the infidelity, which is clearly evident, if he does all of these things, then he can say he's being a good husband and he doesn't control his wife, and it's supposed to be proof that he's not the problem and that he's doing all of the mature adult things that healthy and mentally sound people do when they are in a relationship. But somehow him successfully being a healthy, non-controlling husband ends up with him becoming a murderer. I find it kind of romantic though. As insane as that may come across, I thought their dynamic was balanced in a way that made sense and every action that our characters took was justified. But this is what I meant when I said our characters didn't have any secrets, and that being something that took away from the quality of the psychological trip. It was easy for me to figure out the cause of why something disturbing happened. It's like, a husband doesn't want to be blamed for making his wife miserable because every time he asks her about where she's been and who she's been with, she basically tells him that he's holding her hostage. But then when he doesn't ask her anything and shows no interest in the motive behind her actions, then she says he doesn't love her and she feels like she doesn't get enough attention. So she starts dating other men, and in turn he does whatever he can to make sure he keeps his marriage together without revealing that his marriage is really all he cares about aside from being a father. Okay, now with all that being said, let's get into the complex surrounding the idea of a toxic masculine, at least when it comes to this film. Our main character pretends to be ignorant and oblivious to the fact that his wife is having sex with other men and dating outside of their marriage, so that he can have the ability to say that the toxic nature of their relationship is not his fault because he'd rather not ask her questions that he doesn't want to know the answer to. I guess my question is, does a man with limitation and clear boundaries around how much he knows about his wife's social and private life automatically qualify him for being a healthy masculine? I think it's this idea that if you don't ask your partner about what they are doing when you're not around, then you can't be seen as a toxic force in their life. Maybe it's the fear of being seen as controlling and trying to avoid being called toxic or being abandoned, because that could hurt even more when you genuinely are just concerned about your place in someone's life. It could just be the desire to clearly communicate and understand where you belong and whether or not your efforts, time, energy, and loyalty is being taken for granted. It could be just wanting to know if your partner is being honest, not just with you, but with themselves and in general. Maybe it's just about giving yourself the opportunity to know whether or not you're being treated with honor and with respect in the relationship. These are all things that will 100% be important to someone who is really seeking to connect on a deeper and more intimate level with the person they're in a relationship with. I think it's more about just making sure that you guys are on the same page about the meaning, value, motive, and intention behind being in each other's lives. I think sometimes when you say nothing in hopes that it will keep you on the right side of the one you love, you end up suffering in silence. And in Vic's case, that suffering took on more extreme forms and became violence. I think this movie may have been intended to be hypothetical, but I feel as though it's so real. Kudos to the filmmakers, actors, and production crew for the development of the dynamic between the husband and wife, because although the overall story I felt was lacking a greater motive, the twisted and tortured connection between Melinda and Victor I felt was beautifully manifested in the end, and I felt I was able to really gain something from the underlying themes and symbolism in the relationship.